In this Development Finance Today roundtable, in association with Watson Farley and Williams, and supported by Aldermore and ZSL Capital, we will discuss what could cause overruns on a development project, this year specifically, and how all parties in a transaction chain can help mitigate this. John Carter, Commercial Director of Commercial Real Estate at Aldermore, and Daryl Thorpe, co-founder and principal at ZSL Capital, will be joined by Ranjiv Kumar, partner at Watson Farley and Williams. Also in attendance will be Rochelle Ye, Director at Next Route Finance Limited, Jay Budia, Director at JB Cost Associates, Demi Palioris, Director at Arco Developments, and Martin Cruz, Development Director at CityBlock.
Overruns have always been there, always have been and always will be. I think a lot of the requirements are that the people developing have felt that values that they want to achieve are not there just now, but will be in time. So I think that's probably driven a lot more of the demand and maybe the supply as well to kind of back that up.
Rochelle, have you seen it from a broker's perspective, more demand for that type of product?
Yeah, I think as you said, we've had quite a slow market. So where you had a term, say 18-month term, it has naturally extended for whatever reason, the majority of the time because of the sales haven't been happening, which is kind of by default you had to almost refinance and look at these products. But in a way it kind of works quite well because you've got other aspects that you are considering. So the developers generally will have another deal in the pipeline. So you're almost able to be more like a strategic partner for them to say, okay, this is what you've got currently happening, this is where you're looking at going, and also restructuring in a way using those products. So it actually works really well for us.
Perfect. And Demi, have you used this type of product before if one of your schemes has overrun?
We did. We used a development exit product on a block of flats that we built in Hertfordshire.
Okay.
And it was purely because the market softened. And then we just thought we need to buy a bit more time.
Yeah.
And it helped out in the end. It helped out in the end because we achieved the GDV that we were hoping to achieve.
Perfect. And Martin, what's your thoughts on these products? Have you used one of them before?
We haven't. We tend to go for more traditional funding where we have an investment loan tied into the development loan. And obviously where we're now moving more into residential, we're actually looking at a 6-month lag post-completion to actually allow us to sell assets.
Okay.
And I suppose...
so is that built in at the front end then?
Yeah, to mitigate the risk on that. We probably wouldn't stretch ourselves for that very reason.
Jay, as a QS, do you, how often do you see business plans going to plan and developers actually hitting their deadlines?
I think it's quite rare to see it actually always on time, being delivered on time, especially construction sites. It's an unforeseen, you've never built this physical product ever before until it's actually done and delivered on site. So you've got to spend a lot of time pre-planning up front before you even put that spade in the ground. And I think that's where a lot of our clients are just trying to rush to get onto site, either to start without doing their upfront due diligence or upfront planning or design. And that's, I think, is one of our biggest bugbears.
In terms of the key issue in relation to delays, I think it's all linked to the skills shortage that we've got in the UK at the moment across the construction sector, linked to probably a boom in the last 2 or 3 years in development outside of London particularly. Right. And I think certainly in the cities, things like the PRS coming through, quite a big Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, all these cities, it's pulling labour into the cities and provincial cities, particularly in student accommodation. If you look at all the ones that have failed this year, they can't get the labour there because everyone's that used to pull labour from the main cities to come and do those projects back when the economy wasn't so strong.
Right.
Now I think we're finding that there is no labour.
I think developers are inherently optimistic, individuals anyway, certainly those that were the smaller end of the spectrum. So applying an element of realism across that and having the right contingency, not in cost. And a lot of people spend a lot of time on cost contingency, but time contingency is as important because obviously it has a cost associated to it, and trying to factor that into to help. What the guys have just been saying now is just making sure you've got proper planning. The more you can pre-plan up front and understand you're talking about contractors there, but I think it's all your counterparties. There's so many counterparties in a project, from your lawyers to your contractors to your lenders and to because the whole thing. Understanding and doing your due diligence, I guess, on each of those counterparties to try and minimise and mitigate the risks of something happening with them.
Yeah.
With contractor going pop, as Martin's had. But we've seen examples over the last couple of years, and I'm sure a lot of us here have worked with developers who had a lender go pop on them, because there was a couple of big names over the last couple of years. You know, who would have thought that a few years ago? Yeah, that your lender could go pop, and the impact that's going to have. So there's all of that to consider.
Would you use someone who's brand new?
We would, but I think there's certainly an element of loyalty. I suppose we're not that focused on price point. It's certainly about relationships. And I go back to the situation where we had a contractor go bust on us 8 weeks before we were due to hand over the students coming, and they were sort of 15 weeks behind. So we had a lot of work to do. Now our lender was very supportive, and without them we wouldn't have got there.
Yeah.
And I think certainly there were other lenders who might not have known us that well, who would have just stepped in and said, no, you need to park this now for a year, and would have lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Whereas actually having the support of a lender who we've worked with for 10, 15 years was really beneficial.
We put a lot of trust in our broker as well.
Yep.
So we tend to kind of accept, if they're taking us to a new lender, for instance, accept that they've done their due diligence, they've built relationships. Relationships are very important. But if we were to use someone new, we definitely wouldn't say no, and kind of rely on a broker.
Trust your broker's opinion.
I think this comes down actually to one of the reasons why there's actually been an increase in the products, because we had a few cases where the client had, say, the 18-month term and because of the overruns, needed to extend by a couple of months. But because the lender had their funding line was institutional funds, they had a covenant attached to it. So they literally had to, there was no option for them to extend.
Right.
So that's quite detrimental. So obviously time was the issue, stress occurs on that the whole scheme and the project in effect could go downhill. So we had to obviously step in. So by doing that due diligence our end, we're able to kind of help out a bit more so.
Fundamentally, you never know how long a project's going to take to build until your foundations are in. And that's just a fact.
Right.
Archaeological remains, there's all sorts of risk when you actually start looking at it, that until the foundations are in, there is a period you can estimate what you think it's going to take to cure those and to get to that point. But you'll never truly know until your foundations are in, and that's when the risk starts diminishing.
Which is a good point. And I've seen ones where it was mapped and it was a sale from a big supermarket, and actually exactly where someone's foundation was going to be, there was a pipe there that wasn't meant to be there, it was wrong. So and that's not anybody's fault, it's not the borrower's fault.
Yeah.
So that's the point about, if you're backing someone, you need to work with them.
I think it's about continuously monitoring. There's always going to be early warning signs on sites of when an overrun's going to happen, when a contractor's not performing against his plan. And you just got to be aware of those early warning signs and actually interrogate what's happening at that point. I want to also say, like in 2018, we had 2 contractors go under, and this got me thinking to do more due diligence actually while we're on site. So we started running, I know Dun and Bradstreet reports aren't most current, but at least we started to run them halfway through projects, just to see what else they've got, where else they're stressed as the contractor.
Well, we write into our JCT contract now, we demand to see proof of payment to subcontractors as a standard. And any contractor refuses that, we just don't use them.
Do you foresee any other events or anything this year that could potentially halt or stall developments?
I mean, I think we've got to talk about coronavirus and potential impact of that. Large number of people turning up in a single area, particularly these big city centre developments. If it does spread here, and get a bit more, that could really delay projects.
Didn't even think about that.
6-12 months,
Wow.
In reality.
But I also think that confidence coming back, and then the growth of people looking to do developments with a limited workforce, that in itself is a risk, and it's that bit about making sure that your supply chains are secure, and it's this bit about your upfront due diligence about who is it using, are we comfortable with that? Because I think that rapid growth does create some other risks.
Do you think there's always been a construction skills crisis or shortage, or do you think it is just based on the fact that it's a booming industry?
I think it has been one for years. I think less and less people going into the sector. I think, and also we've obviously relied on foreign trade for the last sort of 10 years to top up. Wages have got high, it makes it more attractive. My understanding is now back in Poland places, the wages are getting a lot better. So it's not really Brexit that's causing the problem, it's the fact that people can earn as much money back home.
Yeah.
And there's not the desire to come here. So all that's going to do is inflate prices in the UK.
if the costs are going up, it's where does that pass on to, or if it's not passed on,
Yeah.
it will inevitably end up that way.
Yeah, most construction disputes happen because there's that ambiguity and uncertainty in the contract. So phrases like, you know, to be determined at a later stage, or in line with the contractor's usual practice, those are best avoided. And so you can have quite a bit of certainty, to your point, in the contract itself. There's obviously the stuff that's around the edges which no one can control, but certainly the documentation should be robust in terms of apportioning risk and liability and making sure that for everything, every item that's done, somebody is responsible and that they deliver on time as well. I think the other thing with the process is essentially that the tender processes are that much shorter these days. There's a rush to get documents and everything else out. So perhaps that compromises feasibility studies, and perhaps that also compromises the idea that these things should be very certain before the spade goes in the ground.
I think going back to your point with regards to, I think contractors have a responsibility as well to say, look, enough's enough.
Yep.
We need to sit down and have a discussion. And certainly, if my contractors were saying that to me, I would definitely listen.
Yeah.
It's not just about build, get it finished, and walk away with no money, because I wouldn't, you know, fundamentally we're all here to earn a living.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we want everyone throughout our whole supply chain to earn.
Yep.
There's got to be enough on the table for everyone, and I think that gets back to that really robust feasibility at the start, so that someone's not coming in with ridiculously low costs and ridiculously high-end values that everyone just goes, that, well, they're not realistic. It's not going to work. And that's to your point, it's not about the cheapest. It's actually about what's realistic.
Yeah.
And there's some fat built into it for everyone, so you can actually manage the fact that we come back to there will always be cost overruns. There always has been. So you just accept, if you're experienced in doing this, you know that. That's going to happen. And it's building enough fat in to cover those unforeseeables.
I think you've got to quantify that unforeseen and that those unpredictables in a contingency pot, and that fact is very key. I never push a contractor to deliver always hard on their price. If I know they can't perform, if I know they've got stresses on delivering on that job, I just want to have an open book conversation. Are they going to meet the deadline? Are they going to do it within the budget? If they can't, we have to sit down with their client. He's got a contingency and just look for other options.
We've talked a lot about that kind of pre-planning before you go into a project, but that needs to continue throughout the project. There's a lot of, if you take a monitoring survey, for example, going out on a drawdown basis, they're generally looking retrospectively and reporting reactively. You need to take that to the next level and involve more of the stakeholders. Some do a much better job than others, but ensure all the stakeholders are aware of where we're at, but what is upcoming over the next 1, 2, 3 months.
And cost to complete and all that look forward.
And make sure all the stakeholders are involved in that, because then it can be addressed quicker rather than it becomes a surprise to one of the stakeholders down the line.
We've seen on a number of occasions relationship managers sending emails to borrowers, developers, and saying, well, actually this is fine and you should carry on. And in the fullness of time, that's come back to sting us a little bit. So there needs to be sort of rigorous process and some protocol after the cost overrun has been identified, so that parties are generally aware of what their position is. And it's great having an aligned approach, because most people want to come out in the same way, a successful exit and so on.
Yep.
But I think it's important for everybody to understand where they are, what their protections are, and how they move forward.
Thanks for watching our latest filmed roundtable. If you would like to star in or even sponsor one of our next roundtables, we have them in April, May, September and October this year. So please do give me a call or drop me an email. Details will be in the video.